The words hit me like a physical blow, echoing through the funeral home as mourners fell into shocked silence. My own daughter, Catherine, stood at the podium, her face twisted with decades of resentment as she stared directly at me. "You should be the one in that coffin, not Daddy." In that moment, as I sat in the front row beside my son Michael, something inside me finally broke. For 45 years, I had been Dr. Judith Wells, respected orthopedic surgeon, devoted wife to Robert, mother to Catherine and Michael. I had built a life around my family while maintaining a demanding career, always careful not to overshadow Robert's success, always making sure everyone else's needs were met before my own. The funeral home was filled with Boston's elite, Robert's business associates, our neighbors from Beacon Hill, the people we'd called friends for decades. Gloria, our housekeeper of 25 years, sat directly behind me, her hand resting protectively on my shoulder. I could feel her fingers tighten at Catherine's words. Michael started to rise, fury evident in every line of his body, but I placed my hand on his arm. "Not now," I whispered. Catherine continued her eulogy as if she hadn't just wished death upon her own mother, speaking of Robert's business acumen, his philanthropy, his perfect fatherhood. The Robert she described was a saint, a martyr who had tolerated a cold, career-obsessed wife for the sake of their family. I sat rigidly, my spine a steel rod, my face a mask that revealed nothing as my daughter systematically dismantled my marriage in front of everyone we knew. Inside, a storm was brewing, one that had been gathering strength for decades. After the service, people approached me with pitying eyes, murmuring condolences while stealing glances at Catherine, who stood across the room holding court with her husband William, a prominent corporate attorney whose ambition was matched only by his disdain for me. Judith, Nancy Davenport, my oldest friend and fellow doctor, approached with tears in her eyes. "I can't believe what just happened. That girl needs—" "Not here," I said quietly. "Come by the house tomorrow." The reception was a blur of black clothing and hushed voices. I moved through it mechanically, accepting condolences, thanking people for coming, playing the role of grieving widow while feeling increasingly like an imposter in my own life. When we returned to the Beacon Hill mansion that had been our family home for 30 years, Catherine wasted no time. She cornered me in Robert's study, where the smell of his cologne still lingered. "Mother," she said coldly, "William and I will be handling Daddy's estate. I've already spoken with his attorney." I looked at my daughter, tall, elegant, with Robert's piercing blue eyes and my auburn hair, now streaked with subtle gray. At 45, she had achieved everything she'd ever wanted: partnership at a prestigious law firm, marriage to William, twin daughters attending an exclusive private school. Everything except, apparently, the ability to see me as anything other than an obstacle. "The reading of the will is scheduled for next week," I replied calmly. "And I'm still very much alive, Catherine, despite your wishes to the contrary." She flinched, the first real emotion I'd seen from her all day. "That was a slip of the tongue. I was emotional." "A Freudian slip, perhaps," I said, my voice steadier than I felt, but not a lie. Catherine's eyes narrowed. "You never loved him. You were always at the hospital, always putting your patients first. Do you know how many school events you missed? How many times Daddy had to explain to my friends why my mother wasn't there?" Old guilt surfaced, but something else rose alongside it: anger. I missed some events, yes. I was saving children's lives, Catherine, repairing broken bones, giving people back their mobility, and your father encouraged my career, was proud of it. He tolerated it," she snapped. "He told me how lonely he was, how abandoned he felt. You forced him to play both mother and father while you chased professional accolades." The accusation wasn't new, but hearing it on the day of Robert's funeral ignited something in me. For decades, I'd accepted the narrative that my career made me less of a mother, less of a wife. I'd absorbed the guilt, compensated by being excessively accommodating in other areas of our life together. "That's enough," Michael's voice came from the doorway. My son stood there, his face drawn with grief, but his eyes hard as he looked at his sister. "Dad's body isn't even in the ground yet, and you're attacking Mom? What's wrong with you?" Catherine turned on him. "Of course you'd defend her. You always were her favorite." "I wasn't anyone's favorite," Michael said quietly. "I was just the one who saw both our parents clearly." Catherine grabbed her designer handbag from Robert's desk. I'm going home. William and I will be back tomorrow to start going through Daddy's papers. Don't touch anything in this room until then. After she stormed out, Michael came to stand beside me. At 42, my son had his father's height, but my features, his face softened by the compassion that had led him to become a social worker, rather than follow either of his parents' lucrative career paths. I'm so sorry, Mom, he said, putting his arm around my shoulders. What Catherine said at the funeral was unforgivable. I leaned into him briefly, then straightened. I need to be alone for a while. Are you sure? I can stay. I'm sure. Gloria is here and I need to think. After Michael left, I climbed the stairs to the master bedroom I'd shared with Robert. I changed out of my funeral clothes methodically, hanging the black dress in the closet, placing my pearls in the jewelry box he'd given me on our 30th anniversary. Then I sat at my vanity, staring at my reflection. At 68, my face showed the years of my life. Laugh lines around my eyes, a permanent furrow between my brows from concentrating during countless surgeries. My hair, once vibrant auburn like Catherine's, was now silver, cut in a practical bob that required minimal maintenance. The woman looking back at me was a stranger. For decades, I'd defined myself through my relationships to others. Robert's wife, Catherine, and Michael's mother, Dr. Wells, to my patients. But who was Judith? Did she even exist anymore? I opened the bottom drawer of the vanity and pulled out a leather-bound journal, my private thoughts recorded sporadically over 40 years of marriage. I'd stopped writing in it around the time I turned 60, when Robert's first heart attack had forced him into early retirement, and my own schedule had been rearranged to accommodate his needs. Opening to a random page from 15 years ago, I read my younger self's words. Robert was distant again tonight. When I asked what was wrong, he said I wouldn't understand, that my world is too different from his. Sometimes I feel like he resents my career, even as he boasts about it to his friends. Catherine takes his side, always. She looks at me like I'm the enemy. Only Michael sees me clearly. I closed the journal, a heaviness settling in my chest. Had Robert truly been proud of me, as I'd always believed? Or had Catherine spoken the truth, that he'd merely tolerated my career while painting me as a neglectful wife and mother to our children? A soft knock on the door interrupted my thoughts. Gloria stood there, her kind face concerned. Dr. Judith, I've made you some tea, and there's soup warming on the stove when you're ready. Gloria had come to us from El Salvador 25 years ago, initially as a housekeeper and nanny to help with the children when both Robert and I were working long hours. Over time, she'd become more family than employee, the person who knew the intimate details of our daily lives better than anyone. Thank you, Gloria, I said, accepting the tea. I don't know what I'd do without you. You would manage, she said firmly, sitting on the edge of the bed. You are stronger than you know. I took a sip of the chamomile tea, allowing its warmth to soothe me. Did you hear what Catherine said at the funeral? Gloria's expression hardened. Yes, it was cruel and untrue. Was it, though? I asked quietly. Was I a bad wife? A bad mother? Dr. Judith, Gloria said, using the title she'd never abandoned despite my repeated requests to just call me Judith. You worked hard, yes, but you were here. You helped with homework. You attended what events you could. You never missed birthdays or Christmases. But Robert, Mr. Robert, Gloria said carefully, was not the saint Miss Catherine believes. She hesitated, then added, There are things you don't know. My heart began to pound. What things, Gloria? She shook her head. It is not my place to speak ill of the dead, but know this. You were a good wife to a man who did not always deserve your loyalty. After Gloria left, I sat with my cooling tea, her words echoing in my mind. What didn't I know about my husband of 45 years? What secrets had he kept that Gloria, living in our home, had observed? My phone chimed with a text. It was from Lisa Montgomery, my goddaughter, whose orthopedic residency I had mentored years ago. Just heard about Robert. I'm so sorry, godmother. I'm flying in from Chicago tomorrow. Please let me know if you need anything at all. Lisa had been the daughter of my best friend from medical school, Rachel, who had died of breast cancer when Lisa was only 10. I'd stepped in as a maternal figure, guiding her through adolescence and into adulthood, encouraging her interest in medicine. Now 30, she was a rising star in pediatric orthopedics at Northwestern. I texted back a brief thanks, feeling a small comfort that Lisa would be here soon. Unlike Catherine, she had never resented my career. She'd been inspired by it. Setting my phone down, I walked to the window overlooking Beacon Hill. The Boston skyline glittered in the distance, lights reflecting off the Charles River. This view had been part of my life for decades, the backdrop to my marriage, my family, my identity as Mrs. Robert Wells. But as I stood there, Robert's words from our last real conversation echoed in my mind. 3 days before the massive heart attack that took his life, we'd argued about his insistence that I sell my practice and fully retire. "You're almost 70, Judith," he'd said impatiently. "It's time to let go. We should be traveling, enjoying our golden years." "I've scaled back to part-time," I'd responded. "My patients still need me. The practice isn't just a job, it's my life's work." His face had hardened in a way that had become increasingly familiar in recent years. "Your work has always come first, hasn't it? Before me, before the children." "That's not fair, Robert, isn't it? Ask Catherine how she feels about your priorities." It was an old argument, one we'd had in various forms throughout our marriage. But something about his tone that day had been different, more final, as if he'd made a decision I wasn't privy to. Now, staring out at the city I'd called home my entire adult life, I wondered what that decision had been. What had Robert been planning before death intervened? My reflection superimposed over the cityscape showed a woman I barely recognized, grief-stricken, yes, but also confused, angry, lost. Beneath the socially acceptable veneer of the grieving widow was a more complex reality. I was mourning not just Robert, but the certainties I'd built my life upon. Had my marriage been what I thought it was? Had Robert truly loved me? Or had he, as Catherine suggested, merely tolerated me? What secrets was Gloria alluding to? I turned away from the window, my gaze falling on Robert's side of the bed, neatly made, waiting for an occupant who would never return. On his nightstand sat his reading glasses, a biography of Churchill he'd been working through, and his iPad. I hesitated for a moment, then picked up the iPad. Robert had always been meticulously organized, especially with his digital life. As the CEO of a successful investment firm, he'd been an early adopter of technology, embracing each new advancement with enthusiasm. The device unlocked with my thumbprint, something that surprised me momentarily until I remembered that years ago, we'd registered each other's prints on our devices in case of emergency. How long had it been since we'd shared that level of transparency? I opened his email, not entirely sure what I was looking for. His inbox was organized with typical Robert precision: folders for business, personal correspondence, household matters, each of our children. But there was another folder simply labeled J that I'd never seen before. My hands trembled slightly as I tapped it open. Inside were hundreds of emails spanning back nearly 15 years, all concerning me. Correspondence with Catherine about my workaholic tendencies, emails to my practice manager asking about my schedule, messages to William discussing the Judith situation. One email from just 2 weeks ago caught my eye, a response to Catherine. "I've made the necessary arrangements. Once everything is finalized, your mother will understand that some choices have consequences. It's time she learned that lesson, even at this late date." I set the iPad down, my mind racing. What arrangements had Robert made? What consequences was I meant to face? The answer, I suspected, would be revealed at the reading of the will. But one thing was already clear. The man I'd been married to for 45 years had been keeping secrets, and my daughter had been his confidant. As I sat in the bedroom that no longer felt like mine, surrounded by the trappings of a life I was beginning to question, something shifted inside me. The pain of Catherine's public rejection at the funeral, the mystery of Robert's hidden communications, Gloria's cryptic warning, all of it crystallized into a single clarifying thought. It was time to discover who Judith Wells truly was, beyond the roles of wife, mother, and doctor. And perhaps more importantly, it was time to fight for what was rightfully mine. Not just material possessions, but my dignity, my truth, and my place in the world. Tomorrow, I would begin the process of reclaiming myself, Tonight, I would allow myself to grieve, not just for Robert, but for the life I'd thought we shared. Sleep eluded me that night. I lay awake in my king-sized bed, the empty space beside me, a physical manifestation of all that had changed. By dawn, I'd made a decision. Before Catherine and William arrived to go through Daddy's papers, I needed to understand exactly what I was facing. I dressed with purpose, choosing a charcoal gray pantsuit I often wore to medical conferences, professional, authoritative, armor of a sort. Then I returned to Robert's study, iPad in hand. The room had always been his sanctuary. Dark mahogany bookshelves lined the walls, filled with leather-bound classics he rarely read and business books he consumed voraciously. His massive desk dominated the space, its surface meticulously organized even in death, testament to Robert's controlling nature. I sat in his chair, feeling like an intruder, despite having been married to the man for 45 years. The leather creaked beneath me as I opened his laptop. Unlike the iPad, this would require a password. I tried several combinations: our anniversary, his birthday, Catherine's birthday, before trying the one that finally worked. Catherine, 1979, the year our daughter was born. Not Michael's birth year. Not a combination that included me. The desktop revealed the same organizational precision as his physical space. Folders labeled by year, by project, by family member. I clicked on one labeled Personal Private and found myself facing another password prompt. This time, none of my guesses worked. I turned my attention back to the iPad and the mysterious J folder. As I scrolled through more emails, a pattern emerged. For years, Robert had been monitoring my career, my schedule, my relationships with colleagues. There were terse exchanges with Catherine about my failure to prioritize family, discussions about financial matters I'd never been privy to, despite my name being on our joint accounts. One email from 3 months ago chilled me. Catherine, I've spoken with Jensen about the changes to the will. He advises waiting until after the London trip. Your mother doesn't suspect anything, and I'd prefer to keep it that way until everything is finalized. The transfer of the Lake Winnipesaukee property is already complete. Technically, it's yours now, though we'll continue using it as always until the right moment. Our vacation home at the lake had been in my family for generations. My parents had given it to us as a wedding present. How could Robert have transferred it to Catherine without my knowledge or consent? The sound of the front door opening snapped me back to the present. I quickly closed the laptop and iPad, positioning them exactly as they'd been, and moved to the leather armchair in the corner, a visitor in my husband's domain rather than an investigator. Gloria appeared in the doorway. Dr. Judith, Miss Lisa is here. I rose as my goddaughter entered, her face etched with concern. At 30, Lisa Montgomery had grown into a striking woman, tall and athletic, with dark curls she kept cut short for the practicalities of surgery. She crossed the room in 3 strides and enveloped me in a tight hug. "Godmother," she whispered, "I'm so sorry." For the first time since Robert's death, I allowed myself to be held, to accept comfort without reservation. Lisa had never been entangled in the complex dynamics of our family. Her love came without the weight of decades of history. "Thank you for coming," I said, pulling back to look at her. "How long can you stay?" "I've taken 2 weeks. Dr. Brennan is covering my cases." She hesitated, then added, "I heard about what happened at the funeral. Michael called me." I nodded, unsurprised that my son had reached out to Lisa. The two had always been close, though never romantic. More like the siblings they'd practically been raised as, after Rachel's death. "Catherine has always had a flair for drama," I said, attempting lightness I didn't feel. Lisa's expression remained serious. What she said was unforgivable. And from what Michael told me, it wasn't just heat-of-the-moment grief. Before I could respond, the doorbell rang, followed by the sound of the front door opening again. Catherine never waited to be let in, viewing the house as already hers in some fundamental way. "Mother," her voice echoed from the foyer, "we're here to start going through Daddy's things." Lisa squeezed my hand. "I'm right here with you." Catherine appeared in the study doorway, William a half step behind her. She was impeccably dressed in a navy skirt suit that probably cost more than most people's monthly mortgage payment, her auburn hair swept into a perfect chignon. William, tall and distinguished with prematurely silver hair, carried a leather briefcase I recognized as one Robert had given him last Christmas. "Lisa," Catherine said, her surprise evident. "I didn't realize you were coming." "Hello, Catherine," Lisa replied coolly. "I took the first flight I could get after hearing about Robert." Catherine's gaze flicked between us, clearly recalculating whatever approach she'd planned. "Well, William and I have some family business to discuss with Mother. Perhaps you could help Gloria prepare some coffee?" Lisa didn't move. "I think I'll stay with my godmother." Catherine's perfectly penciled eyebrows rose slightly, but before she could respond, William stepped forward. "Judith," he said, his deep voice carrying the practiced sympathy of a man who expressed emotions primarily for strategic effect. "How are you holding up?" "As well as can be expected," I replied, matching his professional tone. "What exactly are you looking for in Robert's study?" Catherine moved to the desk, placing her hand possessively on its polished surface. "Daddy kept important documents here. The deed to the lake house, investment information, his will." "His will is with Jensen at the firm," I said. "The reading is scheduled for Monday." "Yes, but there may be other documents we should review before then," William interjected smoothly. "To prepare you, of course." The implication was clear. They knew something I didn't, something they thought would upset me. The email about the changed will flashed in my mind. "I appreciate your concern," I said, "but I'd prefer to wait for the official reading. Robert's personal papers can remain undisturbed until then." Catherine's mask of sympathy slipped. "Mother, be reasonable. Daddy would want us to get his affairs in order quickly." "And we will," I assured her. "After the reading of the will, this room isn't going anywhere." William placed a restraining hand on Catherine's arm as she opened her mouth to argue. "That's fair, Judith. We'll see you at Jensen's office on Monday then." After they left, Lisa let out a low whistle. "Wow. Catherine hasn't changed, has she?" "If anything, she's gotten worse," I admitted. "There's something going on, Lisa. Something about the will." I told her about the emails I'd found, the transfer of the lake house property, the cryptic references to arrangements and consequences. Lisa listened intently, her brow furrowing. "This doesn't make sense. How could Robert transfer the lake house without your signature?" "I don't know, but I intend to find out." Over the next few days, I began a methodical investigation of my own life, a life I was increasingly realizing had been carefully managed and manipulated by my husband. My first stop was our family attorney, Harold Jensen, a contemporary of Robert's who had handled our legal affairs for decades. His office in downtown Boston exuded old money and discretion, from the oriental rugs to the oil paintings of stern-faced founding partners. "Judith," he greeted me, rising from behind an antique desk. "I wasn't expecting you until Monday's reading." "I needed to speak with you privately, Harold, about the lake house." Jensen's expression revealed nothing as he gestured for me to sit. "What about it specifically?" "I've learned that Robert somehow transferred ownership to Catherine. I want to know how that was possible without my consent, given that the property came from my family." Jensen steepled his fingers, studying me over the top of his reading glasses. "Robert had power of attorney for you in certain matters. For medical decisions, yes, in case I was incapacitated, not for property transfers. The documentation I have indicates broader powers." He pulled a file from his drawer and extracted a document that he slid across the desk. I stared at the power of attorney form, dated 5 years ago, with what appeared to be my signature granting Robert extensive control over our assets. The problem was, I had no memory of ever signing such a document. "This isn't right," I said, my voice steady despite the anger building inside me. "I never signed this." Jensen looked uncomfortable for the first time. "Judith, I witnessed this signature myself. Then someone forged it. Or a memory surfaced. Robert, 5 years ago, asking me to sign several documents while I was rushing out the door to an emergency surgery. He had me sign it without explaining what it was." Jensen removed his glasses, suddenly looking every one of his 70-plus years. "Judith, these are serious allegations. Robert was my client, but also my friend for 40 years. And I've known you just as long, Harold. Look at this signature carefully. Compare it to others you have on file from me." He examined the document more closely, then pulled out several other files containing contracts and legal papers I'd signed over the years. After several minutes of comparison, He looked up, his expression troubled. There are discrepancies, he admitted. Not enough to definitively prove forgery, but enough to raise questions. What else did he do with this power of attorney, Harold? Jensen hesitated. I'm not at liberty to— Harold, I interrupted, leaning forward. Robert is dead. I am very much alive, and I believe my husband may have been systematically defrauding me. Either you help me understand what's happened, or my next stop is another law firm, one that specializes in elder fraud and malpractice suits against attorneys who facilitate it. The threat was unlike me. The old Judith would never have spoken to a family friend this way. But I was no longer that woman. After a long moment, Jensen nodded. I can provide you with copies of all transactions conducted under the power of attorney. But Judith, you should know, there have been significant changes to Robert's estate plan in recent years. How significant? I cannot discuss the will before the official reading, but I strongly suggest you bring your own legal representation on Monday. I left Jensen's office with a thick folder of documents and a gnawing sensation in my stomach. In the lobby of his building, I called the one attorney I knew I could trust, Sarah Jenkins, a former patient whose career I had followed with interest since she'd graduated law school. Sarah agreed to meet me immediately at her office several blocks away. At 35, she was a rising star in Boston legal circles, specializing in family law and estate disputes. Her office was a stark contrast to Jensen's. Modern, bright, with framed diplomas and awards rather than portraits of dead white men. Dr. Wells, she greeted me warmly. I was so sorry to hear about your husband. Thank you, Sarah. And please, call me Judith. I explained the situation as concisely as I could, showing her the power of attorney document and the folder of transactions Jensen had provided. Sarah reviewed everything, her expression growing increasingly concerned. This is troubling, Judith. From what I can see, Robert has been systematically transferring assets out of your joint ownership for years. The lake house, investment accounts, even artwork and antiques from your home. How is that possible? Wouldn't I have noticed? The transfers were structured to avoid triggering notifications. Small enough increments not to raise red flags. Assets moved to trusts and LLCs before being redistributed. She looked up at me. This wasn't impulsive. It was calculated, executed over years. The methodical nature of it made my blood run cold. While I had been caring for patients, performing surgeries, and believing in my marriage, Robert had been meticulously dismantling our shared life. What about the will? I asked. Jensen advised me to bring my own attorney to the reading. That's not a good sign, Sarah said bluntly. I'll clear my calendar for Monday. In the meantime, I suggest we do some further investigation. Do you have access to your joint financial records? I did, though I rarely reviewed them. Another trust I now regretted extending to Robert. Sarah helped me access our banking records online, and together we traced a disturbing pattern. Large sums had been moved from our joint accounts to accounts I had no access to. Properties I thought we owned together had been transferred to trusts, with Catherine listed as beneficiary. What about Michael? I asked. Is he mentioned in any of these trusts? Sarah shook her head. Not that I can see. It appears the assets have been directed primarily to Catherine, with some to William's law firm as well. The systematic exclusion of Michael, our son who had chosen a modest-paying career helping others rather than pursuing wealth, added another layer to my growing anger. When I returned home that afternoon, I found Michael and Lisa in the kitchen with Gloria, the three of them preparing dinner together. The domestic scene, so normal, so contrary to the betrayal I'd been uncovering, brought unexpected tears to my eyes. Mom? Michael looked up from chopping vegetables, his concern immediate. What happened? Over dinner, I explained what I'd discovered. Michael's expression darkened with each revelation, while Lisa periodically asked sharp, clarifying questions that reflected her analytical mind. Gloria remained silent until I mentioned the forged power of attorney. Then she spoke, her voice quiet but firm. Mr. Robert had many papers he would have you sign quickly, Dr. Judith, always when you were rushing to the hospital or very tired after surgery. You noticed this, Gloria? I asked. She nodded. For many years, I thought perhaps it was normal for busy people, but I heard arguments sometimes when you would ask about finances and Mr. Robert would say not to worry, that he was handling everything. It was true. Whenever I'd raised questions about our financial arrangements, Robert had dismissed my concerns, insisting that his expertise in investment made him the logical person to manage our money. I'd accepted this division of labor, focusing my energy on my medical practice and patients while trusting him with our financial future. That trust had been a mistake. "What will you do now?" Michael asked. I considered the question carefully. The woman I had been for most of my adult life, accommodating, peacekeeping, willing to diminish herself to maintain family harmony, would have sought compromise, perhaps even accepted the injustice to avoid conflict. But that woman had died the moment Catherine wished me in Robert's coffin. "I'm going to fight," I said simply, "for what's rightfully mine, for my dignity, for the truth." Lisa reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "We're with you, godmother." That night, as I prepared for bed, I noticed Robert's wedding ring on his dresser, where the funeral director had returned it along with his watch and wallet. I picked it up, feeling its weight in my palm, platinum, heavy, engraved inside with the date of our wedding, and the words, "Two become one." What a lie that had been. We had never truly become one. Robert had maintained his separate identity, his secrets, his plans that excluded me. He had presented one face to the world while harboring thoughts and intentions I'd never been privy to. I placed the ring back on the dresser, no longer feeling the sentimental attachment I might have expected. Instead, I felt a growing resolve, a determination to reclaim what was mine and rebuild my life on my own terms. The reading of the will would be tomorrow. With Sarah Jenkins at my side and the knowledge I'd gained, I was as prepared as I could be for whatever consequences Robert had arranged for me. As I turned out the light, I realized something that should have terrified me, but instead felt strangely liberating. The life I had known was over. Whatever came next would be entirely of my own making. For perhaps the first time since I'd met Robert Wells at 22, I was truly free. Jensen's law firm occupied the top 3 floors of a gleaming downtown tower, its conference room offering a panoramic view of Boston Harbor. I sat rigidly at the mahogany table, Sarah Jenkins to my right, Michael to my left. Across from us, Catherine and William projected confidence, exchanging small smiles as we waited for Jensen to begin. The room carried that particular hushed quality of spaces where fortunes are divided, futures determined. Jensen entered precisely at 10, accompanied by a younger associate carrying a leather portfolio. My husband's will, the final statement of his true feelings toward the family he'd left behind. "Thank you all for coming," Jensen began, his voice carrying the formal gravity the occasion demanded. "We're here for the reading of the last will and testament of Robert Edward Wells." I listened as Jensen went through the preliminary legal language, the technical terms washing over me like waves. My focus sharpened when he reached the substantive provisions. "To my beloved daughter, Catherine Wells Harrington, I leave our family home on Beacon Hill, valued at approximately $7 million, along with its contents." Catherine's expression remained neutral, but her eyes gleamed with satisfaction. Our home, the house where we'd raised our children, where I'd lived for 30 years, now belonged solely to her. Additionally, I leave to Catherine the sum of $12 million from my personal investment accounts, my collection of rare books, and all artwork acquired during my marriage. The methodical dismantling of our shared life continued as Jensen read through the bequests. Catherine received nearly everything of value: our vacation properties, including the lake house that had been in my family, investment portfolios, even the luxury cars. "To my son, Michael Wells," Jensen continued, his tone unchanging despite the stark disparity in the bequests, "I leave the sum of $100,000. Michael made no sound beside me, but I felt him stiffen. The insultingly small amount, from a man worth over $50 million, was a final rebuke to the son who had chosen a helping profession over finance. "And to my wife, Judith Amelia Wells." Jensen paused, a flicker of discomfort crossing his professional mask before he continued. "I leave the sum of $500,000, with the stipulation that she vacate the Beacon Hill property within 30 days of my death. Additionally, I leave her personal clothing, jewelry purchased specifically for her, and her medical books and awards." The room fell silent. $500,000, a pittance compared to Robert's actual worth, and a fraction of what I had contributed to our marriage through my own successful career. The jewelry and personal items were already legally mine. His bequest of them was a final insult. I further stipulate that my wife shall have no claim to any properties transferred before my death, including but not limited to the Lake Winnipesaukee house, the Nantucket cottage, and the apartment in New York City. Catherine was watching me now, her expression a mixture of triumph and challenge. This was what she'd been waiting for, to see me humiliated, displaced, diminished. Sarah leaned forward. "Mr. Jensen, were these transfers executed under the power of attorney document we discussed?" Jensen nodded reluctantly. "Yes, they were." "The potentially fraudulent power of attorney," Sarah clarified, her voice carrying easily in the hushed room. "The one Dr. Wells has no recollection of knowingly signing." Catherine's head snapped toward me. "What is she talking about, Mother?" I met my daughter's gaze steadily. "Your father had me sign documents without explaining what they were. He used them to transfer assets, including my family's lake house, without my knowledge or consent." William's lawyer mask slipped, revealing momentary alarm before he composed himself. "These are serious allegations, Judith, not something to raise at your husband's will reading." "I agree," Sarah interjected. "They should have been raised much earlier, when the fraudulent transfers began. But my client was kept deliberately ignorant of these actions." Jensen cleared his throat. "There are additional provisions to the will." "Please continue," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "Robert has left a sealed letter to be read at this meeting." Jensen removed an envelope from the portfolio. His instructions were that I should read it aloud. He broke the seal and unfolded a single sheet of heavy stationery bearing Robert's distinctive handwriting. "To those assembled, if this letter is being read, I have passed on before having the conversation I planned with Judith. For 45 years, I supported her career, endured her absences, and managed our family's affairs while she pursued professional acclaim. I did so believing that marriage required sacrifice." I felt a flash of anger at this characterization, so similar to Catherine's accusations and so contrary to reality. Robert had built his own successful career while I built mine. We had both worked hard. We had both made sacrifices. In recent years, I came to realize that Judith's dedication to our marriage did not match my own. Her continued insistence on working well past retirement age, her refusal to travel with me or spend time at our vacation homes, demonstrated where her true priorities lay. It was never with family. Michael made a small sound of protest, which Jensen ignored as he continued reading. "I have arranged my affairs to reflect this reality. Catherine has been the daughter any father would be proud of, dedicated to family above all else. She deserves to inherit the fruits of my life's work. Michael chose a path of minimal ambition and responsibility. His inheritance reflects that choice. As for Judith, the provisions of this will ensure she experiences the consequences of her lifelong priorities." Jensen folded the letter and returned it to the envelope, his discomfort now evident. "That concludes the personal statement." The room filled with a heavy silence. Robert's final message had been clear. This was punishment, deliberate and calculated. Not grief-driven or impulsive, but a cold, premeditated act of retribution for imagined slights. Catherine broke the silence. "I think my father's wishes are quite clear and justified." "They certainly are clear," Sarah responded, "as is the coordinated effort to disinherit Dr. Wells from assets she helped build and legally co-owned. We will be contesting this will and challenging the validity of the power of attorney document." William leaned forward. "On what grounds? Robert's letter makes his reasoning perfectly transparent." "Fraud, undue influence and manipulation of a spouse," Sarah replied crisply, "plus potential conspiracy, given Catherine's involvement in these transactions." Catherine's face flushed. "How dare you? I was simply helping my father protect his assets from a wife who never appreciated him." I had remained silent, absorbing the reality of Robert's betrayal, not just financial, but the deeper betrayal of having cultivated this toxic narrative about me with our daughter. Now I spoke, my voice low but clear. "Catherine, your father transferred property that came from my family, property I inherited before we were married, without my knowledge. He manipulated me into signing documents I wasn't allowed to read. He systematically moved joint assets acquired during our marriage, many paid for with my income as a surgeon. If anyone was unappreciated in this marriage, it was me. Catherine's eyes narrowed. You were never there, always at the hospital, always with your precious patients. Do you know how many school events Dad attended alone? How many dinners he ate by himself? How many vacations he took with just me because you were too busy? I was saving lives, I said quietly. And your father understood that when he married me. He knew I was dedicated to my profession. It was one of the things he claimed to admire about me. He tolerated it, Catherine snapped. He hoped you'd eventually prioritize family. You never did. Michael, who had been uncharacteristically quiet, finally spoke. That's not true, Catherine. Mom was there, for both of us, far more than you choose to remember. Dad encouraged her career publicly, while resenting it privately. He played you against her for years. Catherine turned on him. Of course you'd defend her. You both share the same misguided priorities, supposedly helping others while neglecting your actual family. Jensen intervened. Perhaps we should take a brief recess before discussing next steps. As everyone stood, William approached Sarah and me. Contesting the will is your right, of course, but I should mention that Robert anticipated this. There's a no contest clause. If Judith challenges the will and loses, she forfeits even the $500,000. We're aware of the clause, Sarah replied coolly. We're also aware that no contest clauses are generally unenforceable when there's evidence of fraud or undue influence, which we have in abundance. We retreated to a small conference room Sarah had reserved nearby. Michael paced the length of the room while Sarah laid out our options. We have multiple grounds for challenging the will and the preceding transfers, she explained. The questionable power of attorney, the systematic hiding of transactions, the transfer of your premarital property without consent. All of it builds a compelling case. What are our chances? I asked. Good, but not guaranteed. These cases can be messy, expensive, and emotionally draining. They can also take years to resolve. I thought about the prospect of years of legal battles with Catherine, of having our family's private matters dissected in court, of living in limbo while the case wound through the system. Is there another option? Sarah hesitated. We could attempt to negotiate a settlement, use the threat of litigation and public exposure to reach a compromise. Catherine won't compromise, Michael said bitterly. She wants it all, the money, the properties, and most of all, the satisfaction of seeing Mom humiliated. There's something else we should consider, Sarah added carefully. The 30-day timeline to vacate your home. We can file for an injunction to extend that, but you should start thinking about alternative living arrangements in case we're unsuccessful. The reality of my situation hit me with sudden force. I might soon be homeless, forced out of the house where I'd lived for 3 decades. The life I'd built with Robert, the security I thought I had been a carefully constructed illusion. I need some air, I said, rising from the table. Outside on the busy sidewalk, I took deep breaths of the crisp autumn air, watching as people rushed past, all with their own lives, their own struggles, their own illusions perhaps. A text message alert drew my attention to my phone. It was from Lisa. How did it go? We're waiting at the house with Gloria. I couldn't bring myself to type out the full devastating truth. Instead, I replied, worse than expected. We'll explain at home. Home. The word caught in my throat. Soon, it wouldn't be my home anymore. Not legally, not technically. The thought stirred something deep inside me, a resolve that had been building since Catherine's cruel words at the funeral. By the time I returned to the conference room, I had made a decision. I'm not going to negotiate, I announced to Sarah and Michael, and I'm not going to contest the will, at least not in the way Catherine and William expect. They both looked at me with surprise. What do you mean? Sarah asked. Robert wanted to punish me by taking away the material trappings of our life together. He and Catherine assume that's what matters to me. The houses, the artwork, the status symbols. I shook my head. They never really knew me at all. Mom, you can't just let them take everything, Michael protested. I'm not. I sat down, suddenly energized by the clarity of my plan. Sarah, I want to create a new will of my own. Immediately. Sarah blinked in surprise. Of course, but I still have assets they don't know about. My medical practice is worth several million. I have a retirement account in my name only that Robert couldn't touch. And I have the malpractice insurance payout from 3 years ago that I kept in a separate account. The substantial settlement had come after I'd testified as an expert witness in a complex orthopedic case. Robert had wanted me to add it to our joint investments. I had insisted on keeping it separate, one of our few financial disagreements where I had held firm. All told, how much are we talking about? Sarah asked. Close to $4 million. Not Robert's fortune, but enough to live comfortably and fight back in my own way. What are you thinking? I want to leave the bulk of my estate to Michael, Lisa, and Gloria. Nothing to Catherine. I turned to my son. I also want to establish a scholarship fund for aspiring orthopedic surgeons who plan to work in underserved communities. Michael's eyes widened. Mom, that's what I've always valued. I finished for him. Not houses or artwork, but education, opportunity, and recognition of loyalty and love. Sarah was making notes. This is a good start, but it doesn't address the immediate issue of the will contest and your living situation. I'm coming to that. I leaned forward. I want you to file the contest of Robert's will, but with a specific focus, challenging only the transfers made under the fraudulent power of attorney, particularly the lake house. It was never Robert's to give away. And the Beacon Hill house? The other assets? Let them go, I said, surprising myself with how little pain the words caused. Catherine can have the house and its contents. I'll be out within 30 days, as the will demands. Where will you go? Michael asked, concern etching his features. I'm not sure yet, but I won't be homeless and I won't be defeated. I turned back to Sarah. There's one more thing. I want you to prepare a statement for the press. The press? Sarah repeated. Robert was a prominent figure in Boston financial circles. His will is going to be a matter of public record. Rather than let Catherine control the narrative, I want to get ahead of it. Understanding dawned in Sarah's eyes. You want to expose what he did. Not vengefully, but truthfully. A simple statement of facts. After 45 years of marriage, renowned orthopedic surgeon Dr. Judith Wells was systematically defrauded by her husband, who collaborated with their daughter to disinherit her. Michael's expression shifted from concern to admiration. The society pages will have a field day. Catherine will hate it. Her reputation in Boston means everything to her. This isn't about hurting Catherine, I clarified, though part of me, a part I wasn't entirely proud of, did relish the thought of her discomfort. It's about standing in my truth. I've spent decades being diminished, having my contributions minimized. No more. Sarah studied me for a long moment. This is a bold strategy, Judith. You're essentially choosing to walk away from millions in assets that you likely have legitimate claim to. I'm choosing to focus my energy on what truly matters, I corrected, fighting for my premarital property that was taken fraudulently, creating a legacy that reflects my values, and reclaiming my narrative. As we finalized the details of our approach, I felt a strange sense of liberation. The path ahead would not be easy, but it would be authentically mine. When we returned to the main conference room, Catherine and William were deep in conversation with Jensen. They looked up as we entered, Catherine's expression a mixture of triumph and wariness. We've reached a decision, Sarah announced. Dr. Wells will be contesting only the transfers made under the disputed power of attorney, specifically the Lake Winnipesaukee property, which was her family's premarital asset. She will comply with the 30-day vacancy requirement for the Beacon Hill home. Catherine's triumph faltered, confusion replacing it. This was clearly not the fight she had expected. Additionally, Sarah continued, we will be issuing a statement to the press outlining the circumstances of these transfers and the provisions of the will. You wouldn't dare, Catherine said, her voice low. You'd drag our family's name through the mud? I met my daughter's gaze steadily. I'm simply telling the truth, Catherine. If that truth reflects poorly on you and your father, perhaps you should have considered that before participating in his scheme. William placed a restraining hand on Catherine's arm. Let's not be hasty. I'm sure we can discuss this privately without involving the media. There's nothing to discuss, I replied. I'm not interested in negotiating for what should have been mine all along. I'm simply reclaiming the one piece of property that was never Robert's to give away, my family's lake house. Jensen cleared his throat. Perhaps we could... No, I interrupted. The time for mediation was years ago, before Robert began his campaign to punish me for imagined slights. The will reading is concluded, and my position is clear. As I stood to leave, Catherine's composure finally cracked. You think this is over? That you can just walk away with your precious lake house and your dignity intact? Daddy was right about you. You never cared about this family. For decades, such an accusation would have cut me to the quick, would have sent me scrambling to prove my devotion and love. But now, I simply looked at my daughter, this stranger who shared my blood but none of my values, and felt an unexpected calm. You're wrong, Catherine. I cared so deeply that I let myself be diminished year after year. I accepted less than I deserved because I thought that's what love required. I'm done with that now. I turned to Michael. Let's go home. We have packing to do. As we left Jensen's office, I felt lighter than I had in years. The weight of Robert's expectations, Catherine's judgment, and my own self-doubt had been lifted. What remained was a clarity of purpose and a determination to rebuild my life on my own terms. The battle for the lake house would continue, but the war for my soul was already won. Robert's final attempt to control me had backfired spectacularly. In trying to break me, he had instead set me free. The Boston Globe ran the story on page 3 of the society section. Prominent surgeon disinherited by late finance mogul. Sarah's carefully worded press release had done its work, presenting the facts without embellishment, which made them all the more damning. Robert Wells, respected investment firm CEO, had systematically transferred assets away from his wife of 45 years, renowned orthopedic surgeon Dr. Judith Wells, culminating in a will that left her virtually disinherited. By noon, my phone was ringing constantly. Colleagues, acquaintances, fellow members of Boston's medical community expressing shock and offering support. I let most calls go to voicemail, focusing instead on the task at hand, dismantling my life in the Beacon Hill mansion. Gloria worked alongside me, methodically sorting through decades of accumulated possessions. Dr. Judith, what about these photo albums? She asked, gesturing to a shelf in the living room. I paused, considering the leather-bound volumes documenting family vacations, holidays, graduations, moments I had treasured but now saw through a different lens. Had Robert been planning his retribution even then, smiling for the camera while harboring resentment? Take photos of any pictures with Michael or Lisa, I decided. The albums themselves can stay. Room by room, I evaluated what truly mattered to me. My medical textbooks and journals, annotated throughout my career. The antique writing desk that had been my grandmother's. The quilt Michael had made in 7th grade art class. My surgical awards and diplomas. Everything else, the expensive furniture, the artwork Robert had selected, the luxury items that had never really reflected my taste, I left behind. Catherine arrived on the 3rd day of packing, sweeping into the house without knocking, her expression a mixture of fury and disbelief. The Boston Globe was clutched in her hand. How could you? She demanded, following me into what had been my home office. The entire city is talking about this. I continued removing books from the shelves, not bothering to turn around. I merely stated facts, Catherine. Your father systematically defrauded me, and you helped him. He protected what he built from a wife who didn't appreciate it. I finally faced her. Is that what you tell yourself? That the lake house my parents gave us as a wedding present was something he built? That the millions I earned as a surgeon, which went into our joint accounts and paid for renovations on this house, were his alone to distribute? You abandoned him, Catherine insisted, though her voice held a defensive note that hadn't been there before. You were always at the hospital, always putting patients before family. I was building a career, just as he was. The difference is that I supported his ambitions while he resented mine. I studied my daughter, trying to see past the anger to the child I had once held in my arms. When did you start believing I was the enemy, Catherine? When did your father convince you that my dedication to healing people was a character flaw? Something flickered across her face. Doubt, perhaps, before her expression hardened again. You're trying to turn this around. Make yourself the victim. It won't work. I've spoken with William, and we're prepared to fight your claim to the lake house all the way to the Supreme Court, if necessary. That's your choice, I said calmly. But you should know that I've hired a forensic accountant to trace every financial transaction your father made using that fraudulent power of attorney. Every asset that was transferred illegally will be documented and challenged. Catherine's confidence wavered visibly. You'd drag this out for years? Waste what little money you have left on legal fees? I'd pursue justice, yes, not out of vengeance, but because what your father did was wrong. I set down the book I was holding. Catherine, I don't understand how you became so cold, so willing to participate in my humiliation. I wasn't a perfect mother. No one is. But I loved you. I was there for every important moment I could be. You were physically present sometimes, she conceded, but your mind was always elsewhere, thinking about surgeries, patients, your precious career. The accusation stung because it contained a grain of truth. There had been times when the demands of orthopedic surgery had pulled my attention from family matters. But the same had been true of Robert with his business, a parallel Catherine conveniently ignored. I'm sorry if you felt neglected, I said, the words difficult, but necessary. But that doesn't justify what you and your father did. Catherine's expression shifted, a calculation visible behind her eyes. Perhaps we could reach a compromise. The lake house means a lot to you, clearly. Maybe we could work something out. The abrupt pivot to negotiation, after years of conspiracy with Robert, struck me as both predictable and sad. Catherine had inherited her father's transactional view of relationships, everything reduced to assets and leverage. There's nothing to work out, I replied. The lake house was never yours or your father's to take. The court will confirm that. As for everything else, the money, this house, the artwork, keep it all. I've realized none of it matters to me. You expect me to believe you don't care about millions of dollars in assets? What I care about is the principle, Catherine. Your father betrayed me, and you helped him. The material possessions are just things. My self-respect is not negotiable. I returned to my packing, effectively dismissing her. After a moment of stunned silence, she left, the sharp click of her heels on the hardwood floors echoing through the house that would soon be hers alone. Later that evening, as Michael, Lisa, and I shared a simple dinner in the kitchen with Gloria, my son broached the question I'd been avoiding. Mom, we have less than 3 weeks before you need to be out of here. Have you decided where you're going? I had been considering my options, none of them particularly appealing. A hotel temporarily, perhaps a condo rental while I sorted out my next steps. The idea of starting over at 68 was daunting, even with the financial resources I still possessed. I've been looking at apartments, I admitted. Nothing feels right yet. Lisa set down her fork. I have a suggestion. Why don't you come to Chicago for a while? Stay with me until the lake house situation is resolved. It would get you away from Boston, from the gossip and the pressure. The offer was tempting. Chicago was a vibrant city with an excellent medical community. I could consult, teach, maybe even practice part-time if I wanted to. And distance from Catherine and the constant reminders of Robert's betrayal held definite appeal. That's very generous, Lisa, but nothing, she interrupted with gentle firmness. My apartment has a guest suite that's rarely used. You'd have your own space, and I'm at the hospital most days anyway. Think about it at least. Before I could respond, Gloria cleared her throat softly. Dr. Judith, may I speak? Of course, Gloria. In my country, when I was growing up, my grandmother had a saying, sometimes you must leave to find what was always yours. Her eyes, wise and kind, held mine. Perhaps some time away would help you see your path more clearly. I considered their words as we finished dinner. There was wisdom in the suggestion. Boston had been my home for decades, but it now felt tainted by betrayal and loss. A fresh perspective might be exactly what I needed. I'll think about it, I promised. That night, unable to sleep in the bedroom I'd shared with Robert, I wandered downstairs to his study. The room still held his presence. In the lingering scent of his cologne, the precisely arranged desk, the books aligned by height on the shelves. I sat in his chair, running my hands over the smooth leather arms where his had rested countless times. Had he sat here plotting my financial downfall? Had he composed that cruel letter to be read at his will in this very spot? My gaze fell on a small brass key tucked into the corner of his desk blotter, one I'd noticed before, but never questioned. On impulse, I picked it up, examining its antique design. It looked like it might fit the locked drawer of the antique secretary desk in the corner, a family heirloom Robert had claimed came from his grandparents. The key slid into the lock smoothly, turning with a satisfying click. The drawer opened to reveal a stack of leather-bound journals similar to the one I kept, but much more numerous. I lifted the top one, opening to a random page, and found myself looking at Robert's distinctive handwriting. March 15th, 2010. Judith received another award today, the Lifetime Achievement from the Orthopedic Society. She was radiant at the ceremony, passionate about her work as always. Sometimes I wonder if she would notice if I disappeared entirely. Perhaps that's unfair. She loves me, I know, but never with the consuming focus she brings to her patients. Catherine understands my frustration. At least I have one person in this family who truly puts me first. I flip to another entry from several years later. November 30th, 2018. The first phase of the asset transfer is complete. Jensen was reluctant, but ultimately cooperative. Catherine has been invaluable in helping organize the documentation. Judith suspects nothing, too absorbed in her practice even as she approaches retirement age. The woman simply cannot let go of her professional identity, even for me, even for us. Journal after journal revealed a man I had never truly known. Bitter, resentful, meticulously plotting what he viewed as justified retribution for my professional success. Most disturbing were the entries involving Catherine, documenting years of private conversations where they had dissected my perceived failings as a wife and mother. By dawn, I had read enough. I returned the journals to the drawer, locked it, and pocketed the key. These were evidence that might be useful in the legal proceedings ahead, but more importantly, they were the final confirmation I needed. My marriage had been built on a fundamental misunderstanding. Robert had wanted a wife who would make him the center of her universe. I had believed we were partners, each supporting the other's ambitions and passions. We had both been wrong, in our own ways. 2 weeks later, I stood in the foyer of the Beacon Hill house for the last time. My personal belongings had been packed and shipped, some to storage, some to Lisa's apartment in Chicago, where I would be staying temporarily. Michael and Gloria had already left for the airport. I had insisted on one final moment alone in what had been my home for 30 years. The house felt different already. Catherine had sent decorators to measure and plan even before I was out, eager to erase any trace of my presence. Soon, these rooms would be transformed according to her taste, my contributions to making this house a home methodically erased. Surprisingly, the thought didn't pain me as much as I had expected. This house had contained my life for decades, but it had never fully reflected who I was. Perhaps it was fitting that I leave it behind as I embarked on the process of rediscovering myself. The doorbell rang, my taxi to the airport. With one last glance around the foyer, I picked up my carry-on bag and walked out without looking back. Chicago welcomed me with its distinctive energy, a city of magnificent architecture, world-class medicine, and new possibilities. Lisa's apartment in a converted warehouse near the hospital offered sweeping views of Lake Michigan and a sense of sanctuary I hadn't anticipated. "The guest suite is all yours," she said, showing me into a spacious room with its own bathroom and sitting area. "I've cleared space in the closets and the office down the hall if you want to set up a workspace." "It's perfect, Lisa. Thank you." That first night, as we sat with glasses of wine looking out at the twinkling lights along the lakefront, Lisa asked the question that had been hovering unspoken between us. "Are you really okay with leaving so much behind? The house, the assets, it's got to be millions." I considered the question carefully. I'm not saying it was easy, but fighting for all of it would have meant years of legal battles, living in limbo, letting Robert and Catherine continue to control my life from beyond the grave in his case. And the lake house? Why is that different? Because it was never his to take. It came from my family, represented generations of memories that preceded Robert entirely. I sipped my wine thoughtfully, and perhaps because it's the one place where I always felt most authentically myself. Robert knew that, which is why taking it was so deliberate, so cruel. The legal battle for the lake house proceeded slowly but steadily. Sarah kept me updated regularly from Boston, reporting that the forensic accountant had uncovered even more extensive financial manipulations than we had initially suspected. The evidence of fraud was mounting, strengthening our case. Meanwhile, I began building a new life in Chicago. Northwestern Memorial Hospital offered me a position as a consulting orthopedic surgeon, teaching residents and participating in complex cases 3 days a week. The work was invigorating, all the aspects of medicine I loved without the administrative burden of running my own practice. Michael visited frequently, his social work connections in Chicago, providing opportunities to expand his youth counseling program to a new city. Gloria decided to stay in Boston, but not in the Beacon Hill house with Catherine as had been offered. Miss Catherine asked me to continue working for her, Gloria told me during one of our weekly phone calls. I told her I have found a new position with a family who respects others. 6 months after leaving Boston, I received a call from Sarah that changed everything. We've had a breakthrough in the Lake House case, she announced. The forensic accountant found evidence that Robert forged your signature on multiple documents, not just the power of attorney. We have expert testimony confirming the forgeries. What does this mean practically? I asked. Catherine's lawyers have requested a settlement conference. They know they're going to lose, Judith. They're looking to minimize the damage. 2 weeks later, I flew back to Boston for the settlement conference. Sarah met me at the airport, briefing me on the latest developments as we drove to her office. Catherine is feeling the pressure from multiple directions, she explained. The publicity around the case has been damaging to her social standing. Williams' law firm partners are concerned about the association with fraud allegations. They want this resolved quickly and quietly. What exactly are they offering? Return of the Lake House, obviously, but also a significant financial settlement, $2 million, to avoid further investigation into other potentially fraudulent transfers. They're worried about what else might come to light, I observed. Sarah nodded. The forensic accountant has raised red flags about several other transactions. Catherine knows we could keep digging, keep finding evidence of wrongdoing. And what would I have to give in return? Confidentiality. No further public statements about Robert's actions or Catherine's involvement. I considered the offer as we arrived at the law office where the settlement conference would take place. $2 million would more than replace what Robert had left me in his will. And regaining the Lake House had always been my primary goal. The confidentiality requirement was clearly designed to protect Catherine's reputation, which had suffered significantly since the story broke. Catherine and William were already seated in the conference room when we entered. My daughter looked different somehow. The polished perfection of her appearance slightly diminished, dark circles visible beneath her expertly applied makeup. The mediator, a retired judge with a reputation for fairness, outlined the proposed terms of settlement. As Sarah had indicated, I would regain the Lake House and receive $2 million in exchange for ending all further legal actions and maintaining confidentiality about the case. Before I agree to anything, I said when the mediator finished speaking, I have one question for Catherine. My daughter's eyes narrowed warily. What? Why? Not the legal reasons or the financial justifications. Why did you participate in this? What did I do that made you hate me so much? Catherine's composure faltered. For a moment, I glimpsed something vulnerable beneath her hard exterior, the child who had once run to me with skinned knees and school art projects. I didn't hate you, she said finally, her voice softer than I'd heard it in years. I wanted to be your priority. Just once. Dad was the one who was always there, always present. You were this force passing through our lives, brilliant and dedicated and admired by everyone, but never fully there, never just Mom. The words struck home with painful accuracy. There was truth in her perception, however distorted by Robert's influence it had become. I'm sorry you felt that way, I said quietly. But what your father did, what you helped him do, wasn't justice or balance, it was cruelty. Catherine looked away. Are you accepting the settlement or not? In that moment, looking at my daughter across the conference table, I realized that some bridges couldn't be rebuilt. Some relationships were damaged beyond repair. Catherine had made her choice years ago, casting her lot with Robert and his narrative of me as the villain of our family story. No settlement agreement would change that fundamental reality. I'll accept the terms, I said, with one addition. I want the journals in Robert's desk drawer included in the assets returned to me. Catherine's head snapped up. What journals? Your father kept detailed records of his plans to disinherit me, including your involvement. I think they belong with me now. After a brief, tense negotiation, the additional term was added to the agreement. By afternoon's end, the lake house was legally mine again, along with a settlement that ensured my financial security. The journals would be delivered to Sarah's office within the week. As we prepared to leave, Catherine approached me while William was occupied with the mediator. "Is this how it ends, then?" she asked, an uncharacteristic uncertainty in her voice. 45 years of family just over? I studied my daughter's face, searching for genuine remorse or understanding, finding instead only a sense of loss that centered on her own experience rather than recognition of the harm she had caused. "This ending began long before today, Catherine. It began when you decided I was unworthy of the basic respect due a mother, a wife, a person. It was cemented when you stood at your father's funeral and said I should be in that coffin. I was emotional, grieving. We all were," I interrupted gently. "But grief reveals truth as often as it distorts it. Your words showed what you truly believed. And there's no possibility of reconciliation? Ever?" The question hung between us, heavy with decades of complicated history. Part of me, the mother who had held her newborn daughter with wonder and love, wanted to offer hope, to leave the door open for healing. But the woman I had become in the months since Robert's death demanded honesty, even when painful. "I don't know, Catherine. Forgiveness might be possible someday. Reconciliation requires something more. Acknowledgement, remorse, change. I don't see those things in you right now. And if that changes, then you'll know where to find me." It was as much as I could offer, not a promise, but not a permanent door closed either. A space for possibility, however remote it might be. Back in Chicago the following week, I stood at Lisa's window watching the sun set over Lake Michigan, its golden light painting the water in shades of amber and rose. My phone chimed with a text from Sarah confirming that Robert's journals had been delivered to her office. The last loose end was tied. In 2 days, I would fly to New Hampshire to see the lake house for the first time since reclaiming it. Michael would meet me there to help assess what renovations might be needed after years of Catherine's neglect. Gloria had surprised me by accepting my invitation to join us, considering a permanent position as the lake house caretaker in her semi-retirement. Beyond that, the future remained open. My position at Northwestern was fulfilling, offering the perfect balance of meaningful work and personal time. Lisa's home had become a true sanctuary, our goddaughter-godmother relationship deepening into a friendship between adult women who respected and admired each other. The settlement money sat in an account, largely untouched, except for the establishment of the Scholarship Fund for Aspiring Orthopedic Surgeons from Disadvantaged Backgrounds, my legacy taking shape in a way that reflected what truly mattered to me. At 68, I had not expected to be starting over, reimagining my life without the husband I had believed would be by my side into our final years. Yet there was an unexpected freedom in this late-life reinvention, a chance to define myself on my own terms without accommodation or compromise. Robert's final act had been intended as punishment, a stripping away of material comforts and social position designed to diminish me. Instead, it had become the catalyst for my liberation from a marriage that had slowly, imperceptibly become a cage. As the last light faded from the sky, I turned away from the window, leaving the past behind with the setting sun. Tomorrow would bring new patience, new challenges, new opportunities to be fully and authentically myself, not defined by my roles as wife or mother, but simply as Judith, a woman who had faced betrayal and emerged stronger, wiser, and finally, irrevocably free. If you've ever been underestimated or betrayed by family, I want to hear your story in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe to see how I'm rebuilding my life one day at a time, proving it's never too late to start over.